Okay, very good. Alrighty, we're back. Welcome back. Happy Monday. Hope you enjoyed your long break over the weekend. Hi to our online students, Dave and Leon as well. We've got just about everybody here short of Ben as far as my count goes, and so that's good. It's good to see some folks haven't seen in a while. So thanks for coming back. So a couple of different things. Behind me again is projected the current presentation schedule. Online people will be getting an email from me. I know I say that, but it'll happen. Giving you some slightly different instructions because you're virtual. But for the rest of us, it's a good idea, as I was saying before I started the recording here, a good idea not to to wait. I mean, I'm one of the world's worst procrastinators myself. I hate to admit it, but I know it's a fact about me, so I have to compensate for that. And getting yourself going sooner rather than later is good for a lot of reasons. First of all, it relieves a lot of that stress that you feel at the last minute. It also gives you a chance if the article's going to be too hard or too confusing, or you just get overwhelmed and you're not sure how to deal with that. It gives you time enough to pick a different article or to come see me and get some advice or some thoughts on maybe how to just take a portion of the article, right? So everybody's in a kind of different situation because we're at the point in the semester now where after today, in theory, we've kind of finished Feldman. So we started with essentially no epistemology background for the most part. Everybody acted like they'd never taken any epistemology. I'm pretty sure that's right, because 319 hasn't been offered in a while. I used to teach that. And so now, in theory, if you've been sort of keeping up and doing the work, then you're up to speed enough to start thinking about digesting some of these scholarly articles. And they're hard, they're not easy, and there are different things that make different authors challenging. So again, if you want to change your article or anything like that, sooner notice for me is better. Obviously, I've repeated this before, but I'll say it again just because it's important to me. Whatever you do, don't miss your day to present. I mean, if it's going to happen, give me enough notice so that I can have something for the rest of us to do. Now, this is for everybody. The hope is, and I really first hope you guys will do this, but I can't make you do it, is that each of you will read the article slated for presentation that day, even when it's not yours. So the idea isn't that we've got another 8 or 10 meetings where you don't have to do anything but for one meeting and you can just kind of, you're AWOL, that's not what this is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be, and I know just from graduate school and a lot of it, that that's hard, right? Because it's tempting when it's not your day to kind of hang back and not maybe get it done. But the problem with that is that it puts all of the onus, all of the burden on the student doing the presenting, and that student will be you one day. And you might appreciate it when it's time for you to give your presentation, that there are people out there who've looked at the article enough to ask you some questions and talk about it and make it go a little better, right? Just as a diplomatic kind of thing. Plus, the deeper point, of course, is that you get more out of these discussions when you've done the relevant reading, right? I mean, there's nothing worse than going into one of these things not having a clue what's going on, and that's what I'm hoping to avoid. So Bettina had a good question about outlines or overheads or handouts or something, right? If you can get, there's a couple ways we can do it. If you want to just project your material and lecture from where you're sitting with the laser pointer, pointing at things and talking or whatever, that's great. If you want to sit up here and face everybody, I'm kind of giving you guys a lot of leeway here because, as I've said before, public speaking is, something that people get a little antsy about, and I don't have any problem admitting that I've struggled with that too. I mean, it's not easy to get, it depends on the group, of course, and the context, but getting up in front of large groups can be nerve-wracking. This is a much more comfortable environment, you all know each other. So hopefully that won't be too big of an issue, but I know, Dominic, you're presenting, right, a paper? Mm-hmm. And that's going to be what, in Texas?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're going to have you done one of those before?
They had one here at UNCG that did.
Okay. How did that go?
It was a little different because it was me, 3 other presenters, and the moderator in the room.
Yeah. Did you read the paper, or did you talk?
No, I didn't read the
Talk-
paper. When I was meeting with Professor Rosenfeld, we discussed presentation styles,
Mm-hmm.
and I saw some kids read the paper, and I thought that was quite boring.
Yeah.
Mostly because they gave a little bit of analysis in there, but they didn't really get a chance to really talk on major points.
Yeah.
But what I did was I kind of had an outline that I worked with Professor Rosenfeld about,
Right.
and it helped because I had like a list of what I was going to talk about, and some things that like I saw that the audience was like really engaged in.
Right.
Just kind of harping that for a little bit more, was able to explain that a little further, or if I could tell that they weren't quite getting it. But then other things where they're just like, you just
Right.
go through it here. I think having a list of what I was going to help.
That happens. Yeah, that's good. Thanks for saying that. But yeah, in graduate school, a lot you'll see a wide range of styles, right? So sometimes if you're just kind of really, kind of maybe nervous or something, then just reading through the paper, a lot of folks will do that. But I always really like the people that could give a talk rather than make the paper available ahead of time for those who wanted to get all the details. But I do still feel like just impromptu or extemporaneous talking your way through a paper is it's dicier, it can be scarier for sure. Whereas that temptation to just have something to read, and I've seen people at the APA meetings, Eastern Division meeting or Central Division American Philosophical Association meeting, famous folks get up and read a paper, and then other people give a talk. So whatever is comfortable for you. As far as the overheads and handouts and things like that, if you can get it to me in enough time, then if you'd rather everybody have a handout, I can get Maggie probably to make us copies. Shouldn't be a problem. So, and I'm going to be trying to put together just a little bit of a rubric. I don't want to promise. I don't want to overpromise. Under-promise and overperform, as they say, what I want to do here. But I'll try to put together some general guidelines and some suggestions about things to kind of consider doing or maybe not doing, more than doing, that might help a little bit for folks. I do think that if you're able to get up here and do it, that's great, because as I say, there are very few things in life, job-wise. I don't care if you're a teacher where you have to get up in front of people every other day or whatever, or every day, or whether you're in some completely unrelated area with a philosophy degree, you go off and do something else. Chances are there'll be some occasions where you'll have to give a talk or presentation to a customer or to your boss or to your other coworkers. It's just kind of the way life is. There's a lot of emphasis on presentations and group work, and it's not everybody's cup of tea. But I see the pros and the cons either way for that. So, questions about any of this stuff while we're kind of thinking about it. So next time we got Alan and Ben, probably in reverse order though, right? Ben's not here, so I'll try to cover for him if for some reason that doesn't happen. But again, it's always a good idea for any of your teachers if you're in one of those situations to give them some notice, so that because I've had a wide range of experiences in my life with these kind of things. Other things, if I haven't gotten your test for some reason, send me your test. I think I've got just about everybody, but that we need to get those. I'm going to be working to try to get them graded, but it may not be Wednesday. It may be next Monday before I can have that all done. Also, the final papers, right? I don't have the due dates in front of me, but that requires a revision, and so not too soon. It'll be April 1st, Friday, and that's the last month, and it'll start to go fast. So sooner, starting on this sooner is better for sure. Yeah, Jim.
We can write our final paper
On your presentation. Yeah, that was what I was kind of originally thinking, and it wasn't. It was an effort on my part to try to make things easier for people, right? If you've already given a presentation on the topic, then writing a critical thing about it shouldn't be too bad. I'll try again to put, along with the speaking thing, some sort of general guidelines and rubric for the paper. I've got a little bit more cushion time on that, so people know what I want. But ideally at this level, a little bit more than just a kind of book report sort of thing, right? There's always going to be in any of these papers some setting up that has to be done where you're kind of taking the reader through the sort of the big picture. And the same, this is a good piece of advice for presentations as well that I forgot to make, or forgot to say. Sometimes people do presentations and papers and they just assume that the audience is completely familiar with this stuff, just like you are, but you've been like really working on it, let's say, for a while now, and so it seems just clear as day to you and you're getting it all. But in general, I wouldn't do that. Don't assume too much there, because as I say, sometimes people aren't familiar at all, so they didn't read it, or they read it, but they read it quickly, and a lot of it was missed or not absorbed. So, you know, certainly some, for the presentation or for the paper, some stage setting is a good idea always. And then ultimately, like I've said before, try to figure out an interesting argument or two, some critical work in there if there are objections that you want to consider, and then respond or anticipate a response to them. All of that stuff is really what we're kind of looking for. That's the hope, at least. Yeah, Mark.
You said after we do our speech, we have to re-record it.
Yeah.
How exactly?
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, how exactly? I'm not sure yet either. This is the first pass through with this, and I think that so as part of satisfying the requirements for the senior capstone, you have to write and revise a paper after getting feedback from me, and you have to give. There has to be a speaking intensive component. I feel like the people that participated a lot in the classroom discussions, they're adding to their participation right there. They're speaking, and that's great. And I realize, you know, everybody's different. Not everybody is as compelled or feels as comfortable talking, and some people are better in another context, like in a written context. But what I was thinking for the speaking part was you do your day where you lead the discussion on your topic. I'll try to make some notes as best I can, and then give you some feedback in face-to-face or in an email, and then you would go and just re-record like a 10 or 15-minute little video log. It wouldn't, depending on how long these things end up going, you know, we just don't know until we get into them. Sometimes, like Alan's article is really short, but it may turn out that there's a lot in there for us to think about. I don't know. It can be tricky stuff. So that was what I was kind of thinking we would do. And then you can just submit the revised presentation, which is just a shorter version of, you know, overview of what you did in class to me, and that'll make that'll satisfy the requirement. Yeah, Zach.
Let's say we decide to, you know, give a presentation, we stand in front of the class. Are you gonna hook us up with that video?
Well, I'm probably gonna try to do it if people don't have objections to it, and there's several reasons why, right? I mean, it's philosophy, so we have to present reasons why for everything. Well, even silly non-philosophical stuff, right? So the one thing is for our online students, so that they have something to post, so that they can feel like they're not just out in space somewhere. I want them to feel as engaged as possible. We've only got 2, but I want to look after them. The other thing is that I think it's not a bad thing as part of the speaking. I mean, if you're going to buy into the idea that part of what you're trying to get out of a liberal arts undergrad education as an undergrad is, you know, writing effectively, thinking critically, and being able to communicate your ideas, you know, that includes a lot of things, and speaking is part of that. So I think if you can get up here, if you're comfortable enough to get up here and pretend you're the teacher for that day, and let me record it with Swivl, that's awesome. But like I said, because I'm sensitive about a lot of this kind of presentation stuff myself, I'll work with people, right? If you want to do it from where you're sitting, that's fine. If you don't want the swivel on you, that's okay too. But seeing yourself give one of these things can be very, can be a lot of things. But most of all, it can be constructive, because you start to notice, like right now, the swivel's not tracking me, so I can't really get up and move around the room. But you know, there are entire courses on communication where in public speaking. It becomes kind of an art form in itself, right? I mean, I've heard really good philosophy papers very poorly delivered by people and just kind of cringed, and then I've seen people deliver these amazing talks, and the paper was, you know, a bunch of objections right off the bat, counters, you know. So this kind of stuff can happen. But seeing yourself is another way to get some insight, and, you know, if you've never done it before, get some feedback on what I can do better, should I move more, should I use my hands more, there's all this kind of stuff, yeah.
So if I Well, I think that's what I was probably gonna do, just cause I know I can benefit from extra practice of doing that, but
Yeah.
if I do a PowerPoint, do you want me to maybe email it to you so you can email it to my classmates, or maybe I could probably email it?
You can, maybe you can get them all through Canvas.
Yeah, I think I can actually do that.
Yeah, if you wanna do it that way, and if there's a problem, then let me know, and you can send it to me, and then I can post it up onto Canvas and as one of the modules or something. Or put it in Pages or something somewhere, for everybody to have. But yeah, anything you can do to kinda help the audience members along turns out to pay you back in the long run. It really does. Other stuff? I'm trying to feel like I'm missing something. All right, cool. So what I was gonna do for our time that we've got today was, think a little bit, I wasn't sure, you guys have to help me, if we were really done with naturalized epistemology or not. Because they're kind of two, I mean, we talked about it, we started it, we talked some about it, but there's always more that can be said there, so if people are interested in talking about that a little bit more. I've got an argument that I don't remember if I showed it or not, you guys can help me out with that. Did we talk about this one, or did I just show it real fast? We did? Okay. This would have actually been a really good exercise had I thought about it in time for this group, because this is a passage, if you've got your Feldman handy, this is a passage that comes from over on 161, C2, an analogy to language. So remember kind of where we're at, right? We're looking at arguments that some naturalists have wanted to defend, trying to bolster the idea that we can't be systematically irrational, or there can't be widespread irrationality, right? Now, depending on where you kind of come down on this stuff, you might think, I don't really see what the problem is with, I mean, it would be bad, but that doesn't mean it's not happening everywhere, right? I mean, that sort of, you just look around, right? But there are folks out there, and I suppose both on the traditional and the naturalistic sort of ends of the spectrum, who, for various reasons, I guess, different motivations, are not nuts about any kind of empirical arguments or any kind of arguments that are suggesting that we're not, for the most part, rational. My speculation, and it's kind of just that though, is that some of this at least traces back from Quine, because he makes these kind of evolutionary arguments. He'll say that we couldn't be, this is not a direct quote, but he uses a lot of this kind of language, that we couldn't be inveterately wrong in our beliefs about things, because creatures that were that way would end up having a pathetic but praiseworthy tendency to die off before reproducing their kind. So pretty close to a quote from Quine. And then one of Quine's sort of proteges was a guy named Donald Davidson. They're both passed away now, but Donald Davidson made a lot of contributions to event theory, theories of events, actions and events. And Davidson had this kind of principle of charity, and Quine sort of was on board with that as well. This idea that whenever we're trying to understand somebody's utterances or what they're saying, that we ought to invoke a principle of charity that sort of tries to make these things come out true whenever we can. So if you were like a field anthropologist or something, and there's some difficult, hard questions there between the evolutionary arguments and these arguments about various kinds of charity principles and whether they're plausible or not. So what I was going to say about this being a really good exercise, had I thought about it in time, is this is from 161, this analogy with language thing that he says. And he doesn't state the argument, right? I mean, he writes it, but he doesn't list it as premises leading to a conclusion as far as I can tell. I don't see it anywhere in there. And so what would have been a great exercise like a discussion board was for me to give you that passage there and say, now you build the argument premise, conclusion style. Because boy, that can be a real eye-opener when if you're used to kind of already coming in and the argument's been set up for you, to suddenly have to take a piece of prose. You know, now some people are, you know, they write the way the argument, they write it as if it's like an argument. You can really easily identify the premises, but others are not so easy to do. And this would have been a good one here. But the idea is, as I say, roughly that actual human reasoning can't be too far from normative standards, since good reasoning is partly determined by actual practice. And the analogy is with grammar, with whether or not something is grammatical, right? That partly what determines the rules of an evolving language's grammar are, you know, people's actual behavior, right? How they actually speak. And you can think about that, right, as a separate thing. But if you just look around at how words make their way into our language and how we do speak and how it does evolve, right? I mean, 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't have had a culture of text speak. It's kind of everywhere, right? And yet it's ubiquitous now. It's sort of everywhere. You know, it's all over the place. So I took this passage from Feldman. I just read it and thought maybe we could try to get an argument out of it, and this is what I came up with, and you guys can tell me what you think. But so the norms and practices argument, so premise one, the normative rules that are constitutive of rationality are either abstract necessary truths, socially determined conventions, or generalizations from actual human reasoning. Premise two, it's not the case that the norms of rationality are abstract necessary truths. Premise three, it's not the case that the norms of rationality are socially determined conventions. From those three, it looks like we get a simple argument from elimination, right? You know, it's either A, B, or C, and I knock out the two that I don't like, and then I'm able to infer that the norms of rationality are generalizations from human reasoning behavior. If that's true, then I'm able to derive this final conclusion that human beings can't be significantly irrational. Now, remember last time we looked at some of the examples, alleged examples of human irrationality from the psychology of human reasoning data, right? So we had the reasoning with conditionals, right? The Wayside selection task where you have to flip the cards and see if people can catch whether or not they need to make sure that we're not denying the consequent, right? People don't get that. They tend to, unfortunately, affirm the consequent and deny the antecedent. That's not good. We looked at the conjunction problem, right? So the conjunction rule violation, where people assess the probabilities of conjunction as higher than the probability of its conjunct. We talked about that one. What were the other ones there? Let's see. Had a handful of them. Were those the two main ones? I thought we had a third. Yeah, the frequencies of letters. There we go. So something indicating a kind of what seems like a sort of heuristic, a bias in favor of what's easily recalled in memory. Right? So now we've got this argument. It's valid, and this is exactly. I mean, by the way, this is exactly the kind of thing I like to see you be able to do in your paper, right? So if you selected a paper where your philosopher already does this kind of work, like if you had selected one from Rich Feldman or his buddy Earl Connie, they would have already made short work of it for you, but not everybody writes that way, right? Some really famous influential philosophers just don't put it in premise conclusion form. And I've had many discussions with colleagues and people over the years about the value or whether this is overvalued, but I just think it makes it really clear and easy to see what's going on, and then you've got something to structure your discussion around, right? You can say, well, take me through the argument, explain each of the premises if need be, tell me whether the argument is a valid argument. If it's not a valid argument, is it an inductive argument? Right? And then discuss the merits of the premises. Right? So what do people think of this argument?
I personally would reject number two. I would say that, well, it is the case that norms of rationality are abstract necessary truths, and people are significantly irrational. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just it's a sad fact of the matter.
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. Yes, I mean, so you're worried about two here.
Yeah, because I mean, paper I'm talking in Texas is about Plato's theory of the forms, so
Oh.
if we should take those seriously, then I think we should deny number 2.
Alright.
That's just my opinion.
Cool.
But I mean, it seems to be the case though. I mean, it seems to be like how we discussed last time we met, that most of the times in those examples that Feldman gave,
Yeah.
that those were due to lack of actual formal education rather than lack of rationality.
Right.
And if we do set this, I mean, I don't think it's extremely stringent, but decently stringent qualification on rationality, it's going to be the case that the average person
Is
who
it-
lacks decent education is going to miss the mark. And if we realize that, I mean, it's okay to realize that and accept that, but I mean, it's okay to realize it, but I mean, it's a whole different fact of the matter. Like, okay, that's fine, there's nothing wrong with people being widely irrational. It's okay with noticing that people are widely irrational, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
But it seems to be that like a lot of the people who want to advocate for this naturalized epistemology have a problem with people being widely irrational. I don't see why that's a problem, you know?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm kind of with you. You're preaching to the choir, but I appreciate it nonetheless. I mean, so yeah, there's a couple things to wonder about, right? I mean, Feldman, I think, does a pretty good job in the follow-up discussion there about, like, you know, rethinking the examples and what do they really show, right? So and that's always a worry with this kind of stuff, right? Because it's empirical work, it's field stuff, it's test subjects, and you don't know that people are really reading the question the way you intended it to be read, and how many people are really that familiar with the rules of probability calculus, for Lord's sake. I mean, that's not, yeah, Tamir.
I have a problem with number 3.
Okay.
I think that socially determined conventions are a product of human reason.
So wait, let's make sure we're on the same page then. So what 3 is saying is that the norms that govern whether or not a certain belief is rational or irrational are just social conventions. So that's sort of verging on a kind of like we're going to talk about relativism here in just a little bit, this next chapter. I've got that queued up, but I'm not sure we're on the same page in understanding this, right? I mean, certainly there are lots of different social conventions, right? But whether so the options we've got that they give us here are just these 3. Now, of course, you could reject premise 1 if you think there's a 4th or 5th alternative, right? So that's one thing you can do. Anytime you've got one of these arguments where it proceeds by saying, it's either A or B or C or whatever, you always have to wonder if they've left out an option. So I didn't pursue that line in my thinking about this, but I just went with kind of the ones that he mentions as options. So they're either these abstract necessary truths, or they're just they're conventional, or they're generalizations from actual human reasoning behavior, right? So you were back to what you were saying. I'll get you here in a sec, Zach.
Oh, yeah.
Were you understanding what 3 is saying the way I am?
Now
Okay. Just wanted to catch that. Just want to make sure. Yeah. No. So what would I'm just speculating here. I mean, what would it be for the norms that govern human reasoning to just be tantamount to social conventions? It sounds a lot like a view that Feldman talks about in the next chapter, right? Which looks like, well, because different societies and different people at different times and places have, evolved different cultural norms, different various kinds of societal conventions, then there aren't any. There's no final matter or final word on whether or not a belief can't just be rational or irrational. It's rational for society S1 at time T1, given whatever conventions are in force, right? So in the witch doctor society or the voodoo society or the tea leaf reader society, where build your society, make them weird, right? And very different from one another. In those societies, it's rational for those people to form beliefs on the basis of reading the pig entrails or whatever it is, right? I mean, all kinds of stuff. Whereas in our contemporary Western modern society, a lot of folks, the first thing they do is Google it. It's not what they, the first thing they do is try to find some scientific support for it, right? Science is the 800-pound gorilla in contemporary culture here, at least. But yeah, back to Zach.
I kind of wanted to go back to what Dominic and you were talking about. So let's just say that it is the case that human beings are irrational, or many of them are,
Yeah.
above half. What would the consequences of that be for?
Yeah, I mean, what's so bad? Well, I mean, when we were both sort of agreeing that, yeah, I mean, I'm willing to bite the bullet on that conclusion, but it's not like I'm not throwing a party about it. I'm not celebrating human irrationality. I'm disappointed. I'm let down.
It doesn't mean we can't get at the truth still. It just makes it maybe like it's not as easy as we first thought it was. But
Yeah.
it's still possible.
Right, and I mean, so there's a couple ways we could go. I mean, it could turn out that there are ways of avoiding the conclusion that there's significant and widespread irrationality in whatever human population you want to pick, right? One way to try to avoid that would be to say, well, look, the studies have been misinterpreted. They're not really showing what the researchers think they're showing, right? People misunderstood the questions, or when you make the stuff less abstract and more concrete, they do better. They're matching to some prototype or pattern, a typical, rather than they mistake what's more probable for what's more paradigmatic or typical or something. So there's been a lot of work trying to get out of it that way, right? The other thing you could do is kind of like what we were thinking about, which is, well, I mean, if these tests really do show that they're violating what their total evidence supports, then by evidentialist standards, they're irrational. But what's weird to me is I think after reading all this a bunch of times and thinking about it a lot, I mean, do we really need to go out and do field work? I mean, it would just be an armchair conclusion, right? But I mean, I think we all, from everyday life and our day-to-day experience, know that people routinely ignore relevant evidence. I'm not talking about like they don't know the probability calculus. That's pretty far out. Or that they haven't studied conditional reasoning a lot. And people don't do that unless they're taking a philosophy course, right, or a logic course or something. So it's not surprising maybe that they'd make those kind of mistakes. But I'm talking about situations where they've got evidence available and they just ignore it, or they misinterpret it, misevaluate it. Or they don't have evidence and they think that they do, right? Just thinking that something's evidence doesn't make it evidence.
Like flat earthers.
Yeah.
That's kind of the funny thing to me about the way they try to get out of the issue of like these questions showing, or these tests showing human irrationality by saying like, oh, it's because they misunderstood the question, or because they're using the wrong like kind of reasoning scheme in it. And it's just like, but it kind of seems to be like showing that they are irrational, because that is like, if they rationally they would be applying the correct reasoning scheme. So it's like in a weird way they're just like, oh, they're trying to escape irrationality and they're running into it the same way.
But that's kind of assuming like beforehand that they do have an understanding of the conceptual issues involved, like understanding what the words are actually talking about.
Oh, sure. But
Yeah.
but in the cases where they do, it still shows the same things. Like, so that's kind of a trump card in that, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I'd much rather hear you guys talk than hear me talk, but this is really for you guys. One of the hard things that you have to think about is, I mean, do these test subjects, basically you guys, college kids that they can get for free to run these trials on over at Eberhard, right, in the basement of the psychology building, does typical UNCG freshman coming right out of high school really have as part of her total evidence any of this kind of stuff? I mean, when I'm thinking of like what's my evidence, I'm thinking about what's introspectively available to me right now, right? Like part of my evidence right now is that I'm having a certain visual experience, as of it's looking a certain way. I have certain other justified beliefs, like my belief that I know where I parked my car this morning. I have certain thoughts that are available, and I have certain sensations like maybe an itch or a tickle or a sensation of sweet or sour. That's, to me, that's the evidence. Whether I come hardwired with first order logic plus identity written in my DNA, how, I mean, I don't get, I've never quite gotten that, yeah.
Well, here's something like, I'm also a psych major, and I remember when I was a freshman, we kind of did like, within the class, we did one of these tests to see if we would understand that type of logical reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
And I missed it. Totally didn't get it at all.
And it's infuriating, right?
But, yeah, but after like, you know, taking a practical reasoning course, or
Yeah,
eventually I was like, okay, well that makes sense, I understand what my mistake was.
right.
I mean, just because I happened to miss it as a freshman, is that okay to conclude that I'm an irrational person, or the fact that I just wasn't educated in?
Yeah. Or didn't have, I mean, if you're an evidentialist and you're coming from that standpoint, then it seems like it's on the table to say, you know, just to raise the question. I mean, because there's a big difference between the kind of things I was citing as what I believe to be part of my evidence right now, and really pretty abstractly formulated principles having to do with statistical inference and probability and how you update belief, conditionalizing the right way or whatever, right? And just like, well, there are a lot of things in philosophy like that, right? A lot of principles that, if you've taken logic, you know, like, wow, I mean, I got it. So these are equivalent, but you might look at De Morgan's theorems a couple of times in the very beginning and not see how driving the negation in results in this happens. Yeah.
But that doesn't really mean it's not like still the right way to do it, even
Right.
before you know it.
Yeah.
Even if you have no way you could possibly know it, it still
Right.
seems like that's the right way. It
Well,
just
well,
means that like reality's not fair.
I just,
You know, like that. It's easy just to like you know.
I was going to resist you a little bit there and say, is it that that's the right way, or is it that that's the correct answer? Clearly, when the kid, if you've got, you know, Tommy adds 2 and 2 and he gets 5, and we tell him no, and we try to teach him about addition, and he keeps doing that, right? We don't then sort of say, all right, well, you know, we're changing elementary arithmetic for the groups of people that can't seem to get it right. I mean, we know that the right answer is 4, and we're gonna try to figure out why this person's struggling, try to get him some remediation or something. But at the same time, it's hard to know about what another person's evidence concerning something is, right? Given how hard it is to know what your own evidence is. So like one question is like, what is my evidence concerning any particular proposition? That's one sort of question, but then the sort of meta-reflective question or self-reflective question about you having what kind of access do you have to your own evidence? Well, it seems to me it's clearly fallible. I'm not infallible even with respect to my own evidence. And this is where cognitive science and some of these studies might be helpful, because they point out various kinds of systematic biases and errors and mistakes that we're prone to. They probably, you know, depending on the story you like to tell, they probably had some adaptive value somewhere down the line for our ancestors, right? It helped somebody survive long enough to get some food and reproduce their kind. That's the way Quine would put it. Can't remember who was next. Is Zach or Don?
I'll
Yeah.
speak after.
Well, I was gonna say in Zach's example, I think that just proves that, you know, humans are fallible. However, after taking practical reasoning, if he still kept on missing the same problems, then that would just prove he's irrational.
Yeah.
To me, there's a difference there.
Once you've been taught, this is the rule for doing this, and that now it's made available to you, right? Now you've got the evidence, maybe even explicit. If you had to memorize a bunch of this stuff, right? Then it's in memory. So
Another example I would say is like, you know, let's say you've never written a philosophical paper before, and you kind of missed the mark on how to write it. So that just proves that you're kind of fallible in the sense that you don't really know the structure of it. And then once the professor says, hey, take, you know, X, Y, and Z into consideration, and you totally neglect those, that seems to be proving the irrational point rather than the
Yeah.
fallible point.
no, I think that's good. I mean, there's an analogy with what's going on here. Yeah, Zach.
Well, I can't help but think like if like a mathematician came in here and gave us a really complex math problem, we wouldn't be able to do it. But should we conclude that we're irrational, or we're just not?
Fallible is what I
Yeah,
would
you're
say.
not
Yeah, we
you're not
just-
Mr. Spock
We're
and
just not
Commander
just
Data.
You know, we haven't dedicated more time into studying math, and if we did, maybe perhaps we could get it right.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you try to answer it and you put the wrong answer, that's irrational.
Well, I think this is where we're kind of bumping heads a little bit, because I think you're on the side of thinking that just because you got it wrong, it's an automatic, it's an automatic indicator of irrationality, whereas what I'm sort of inclined to think is that, well, clearly you're getting it wrong, but we need to understand what's going on there, right? I mean, you can follow your evidence perfectly and still end up getting it wrong, right? On anything short of conclusive evidence, you can. So why wouldn't the fact that people are systematically getting it wrong show that they're, not so much that they're irrational, but just that they make this mistake? 'Cause, I'm trying to distinguish getting it right from whether the reasons that were available. If somebody gets it wrong, but the reasons available to them were actually pretty compelling, but just incomplete or misleading, then I don't think they're irrational.
See, I think they would be, but I don't see how they couldn't be. I guess that's the confusing
How
part.
they couldn't be irrational?
How they
How
couldn't
do they
be.
go for
Because you're
irrational
thinking of-
like to spend it an hour,
Yeah.
like,
I don't have. There's no easy connection between your reasons and getting it right. Is what I want to say, right? I mean, there's this issue about the truth connection. Sort of, what's the connection between a person's reasons, arguments, justification, and the truth of the matter? And it's appealing maybe to think that, well, if you're just good enough at following your evidence, then you're bound to get it right. But it's just that just isn't true, right? But maybe there's another sense of rational. I mean, there's multiple senses of what we mean here of rational. I'm just going with this kind of evidentialist thing. Was it Zach and then Tom?
I don't know. Well, I was gonna say is to Tyler, if you had to prove Morgan's laws via some logical proof, you could probably do that, and we would say that, and according to what you're saying, is that'd be rational. But if you were asked after that to prove the law of gravitation or something like that, I don't know your evidence, but I would get that wrong.
Yeah, sure. I would probably.
So then, are you to say that you're rational in one sense and completely irrational in another sense, or you're overall generally rational, but you're just fallible when it comes to proving?
Oh yeah, no, I'm not saying you're fundamentally or totally irrational or rational one way or the other. I think it's more about what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a way to be rational about specific things. So you could have a more filled out map, so to speak, of how the world works, and say you'd be more rational.
I mean, we all want to get it right. I mean, getting it right is
That's the point.
great, but as philosophers, we're committed to more than just truth, right? We're committed to reasons, and having the best reasons you can, making use of all available evidence is an important aspirational thing.
I think I might understand where the difference is. I guess because to me, it doesn't matter how much evidence you get. In the end, you'll never have a probability of one, in a sense. Yeah. And that's just because I think about that probabilistically. But I think that's where the disconnect happens, and that makes more sense. Because you feel like you should be able to, if you consider all that, then you should automatically be able to, or not automatically, but be able to arrive at a conclusion.
Yeah, and I think that,
That's certain.
I have justified false beliefs all the time, and I find out, right? I mean, you have all the evidence in the world for thinking something, you believe it, and then later you're in a situation where you can check to see, So I have every reason for thinking my car is where I parked it, right? Why is that? Well, I can make a track record argument that every day in the past when I park my car outside of my condo and I come back from work, it's still there, right? So I got that argument. And I have no reason to think there's anything funny going on. And so I know where I parked my car. I have the reasons, the weight of the reasons favors my belief in that statement, right? And then I walk out and I go there and somebody stole my car. Because every day in Greensboro some cars get stolen, or they change the parking, the zoning, and now I'm towed. There's a guy that comes through my parking lot and tows people every few days, right? So all the evidence in the world, short of conclusive reasons, isn't going to guarantee me getting it right. And I guess what I'm just sort of pushing back on a little bit is this idea that we're going to have any quick and easy inference from Smith got it wrong to therefore Smith's irrational.
Mm-hmm.
we need to know something about Smith's reasons for getting it wrong.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Right, I mean, what was Smith's evidence? Was he paying attention or not, you know? But yeah, this is all good stuff. So I mean, just to kind of come back to the argument here, it seems like Dominic wants to reject two, and he's comfortable if the empirical studies do show that whatever significant means and whatever widespread means, that there's, you know, that's evidence for considerable irrationality, then okay, so be it. And Tamir was interested in this idea of these socially determined norms, right? These conventions. And that's going to come up, I think, when we talk about relativism, the idea that, well, look, there's just really no such thing as really rational. It's just, you know, it's embedded within a context, and you've got to look at whatever the relevant conventions are within that society to find out what you should do, because there's no such thing as what you really should believe, you know, that kind of idea. So yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the way I went to win this argument too. I mean, I think you can make the case that, and this is toward the end of Feldman's discussion here. I was gonna, because I don't think we said much about it, over on 168 where he talks about can epistemological questions be answered a priori. This is one of the big beefs that naturalists have had with traditional epistemology since the beginning. In that famous paper that Quine wrote, Naturalized Epistemology, or Epistemology Naturalized rather, in '69, what Quine, one of the sort of things that comes out of that discussion is, well, first, that Quine really doesn't like the a priori. I mean, and he had already taken on the analytic synthetic distinction in the 50s with his famous paper, Two Dogmas of Empiricism. And he sort of hinted it around in that paper that he thought, along with the analytic synthetic distinction sort of being bogus or not being analyzable, and therefore being bogus, that it would follow from that there is no a priori truth as well. So he's keeping up his empiricist credentials there. I mean, he wasn't a positivist, he wasn't a verificationist, but he certainly was very sympathetic. He was one of their sharpest, most astute critics. So he sort of blows that horn through the essay, through Epistemology Naturalized, that the a priori, a posteriori distinction is kind of this bogus thing, right? And even subsequent naturalists who are much more moderate, I'm thinking here about one in particular, Hilary Kornblith, who's at University of Connecticut, and I've met him, been to several conferences with him. He's a really nice guy. Hillary's kind of a moderate naturalist. He's not a radical. The radical folks want to just turn epistemological questions over to the natural sciences, or in this case, psychology. So Quine famously says, you know, epistemology just falls into place as a chapter of psychology, which leaves me wondering what I'm going to get paid to do. Right? Will I have a job when Quine's done restructuring epistemology? Probably not. But Kornblith and some of his some folks on his side, they too don't like this idea that they pin on traditional epistemologists, rightly or wrongly so, that very much epistemological work can be done a priori, right? That it has to, it needs to be in. He says things like he has this thesis. He calls it the cooperation thesis, and the idea is that this epistemology and traditional epistemologists need to cooperate with, or can benefit a lot from insights made by people in the cognitive sciences, neuroscience, psychology, and so on, evolutionary biology. And you know, I find myself kind of wondering about that. I mean, it seems, if you look at, for example, over on 170, E1 through E4, it looks like, I mean, I think Feldman's right, that E3 and E4 look like, if they're true, they're necessary truths, right? Now, although a lot of these naturalists aren't keen on the a priori, they do generally recognize the necessary and contingent distinction. So, you know, you'd have to look at a specific naturalist in detail to try to ferret out exactly what their view of the nature of necessity is. But the point is just that, you know, the a priori, a posteriori distinction is an epistemological one. The analytic synthetic distinction is a kind of linguistic one. And then the necessary contingent distinction is a logical or metaphysical one. So it doesn't strike me as that plausible to think that they're all going to stand or fall together. I mean, Kripke's already kind of convinced most folks, I think, that they cut across each other, that you can have a contingent a priori claim like I exist, and you can have a necessary a posteriori claim like water is H2O. So some of this has been rethought. It continues to be, and you know, as we get further away from Klein's original article. But if you look at E3 and E4, they look to me like things that can be arrived at through a priori reflection. I mean, Feldman introduces this third category, right? There's the armchair knowledge or common sense knowledge. And he points out that if you think that, look, everything's anything that's not a priori is automatically scientific knowledge and you want to call it that, then fine. But it's kind of a hollow victory, right? I mean, Klein, again, this is all stuff inspired by Klein as far as I can tell, when he talks about how, philosophy is just science gone self-conscious and says things like that, right? So, my knowledge that I've got, ordinary middle-sized objects in my visual field here, and I'm sitting, not standing, and all that, that's scientific knowledge. Well, and it's, didn't have to do any kind of science, as far as I can tell, to arrive at that. That's not to say that studying people in these kinds of ordinary, that's what scientists do, and they get insights into this other stuff, right? But to call it scientific knowledge, I think, is to kind of miss out on that whole swath of stuff in the middle. That's not so armchair knowledge isn't a priori, right? We don't know, like he says, we don't know a priori that skepticism is false, right? Yeah, Zach.
So Quine would deny mental states, like the.
It's funny you bring that up. I'm going out on a limb a little bit here, but I think that Klein would be pretty sympathetic to something like the Churchland's program. That Paul and Patricia Churchland out in California have been sort of beating the drum for what they call eliminative materialism, eliminativism, for a long time now. And this is a view in the debate over the mind-body problem. And as the label suggests, if you're an eliminativist, then you think that over time, eventually, we won't have any need to talk about mind in terms of these traditional folk categories like belief and desire. So think of folk psychology as our sort of entrenched practice of trying to predict and explain each other's behavior based on states like beliefs and desires, right? So if somebody commits a crime, and what's the first thing we want to do is get inside the mind of the criminal, right? What were they thinking? What beliefs did they have? What desires did they have? Why do we want to do all that? Well, because we think that that's going to give us some explanatory power. It's going to help us understand, explain why they did whatever crazy thing they did, and in virtue of that understanding, maybe we can predict future events before they happen. We can stop those kind of people that think that way, right? Churchland, so the eliminativist is going to sort of resist that, and I think Quine's sympathetic to that, frankly. I mean, it wasn't around back then, but I think that he's not a fan of things like mental states, in part because, and for obvious reasons, right? They're like notoriously. He's an empiricist, a neo-empiricist. I mean, you can't see beliefs, you can't see desires. They're evinced only in behavior. So I think he's gone in print defending a kind of what sounds like some version of behaviorism. Yeah.
Okay, because that's interesting to think about. Because my article, Alan Flanagan's his belief is it's an externalist belief.
Right.
And you can see him adding in all these factors on top of evidence that are, completely beyond, that are more, I guess, scientifically oriented.
Oh yeah, right. You got to be functioning properly in a design, with a design plan and an environment for which you were intended, and
And it still
you know,
seems
high
like,
probability of success or reliability.
yeah, and if you like eliminated the evidence that a particular person has, it still, just to me, doesn't seem like it doesn't help me understand anymore what, knowledge is or a justified true belief is. It just
Mhm.
tells me that, something like, oh, he's properly functioning as an environment, and,
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, and one of the things that'll come out when you lead your discussion that day on Plantica is he's using. I mean, I won't steal your thunder. No spoiler alert.
please do.
No, there'll be plenty for you to say. You're going to go the whole time, Zach. we got a long one here. But Plantica, yeah, he is an externalist, which is kind of weird. I remember when we were reading manuscripts, unpublished manuscript versions of chapters of the first book, Warrant the Current Debate, and then the second book was Warrant and Proper Function, and then the third one is Warranted Christian Belief. That's a trilogy. And we were reading those manuscripts, and I was familiar, like most people, with Plantica's work for what he's done in the philosophy of religion, as probably the foremost Christian analytic philosopher that's out there, made, big contributions to the field. And, on the one hand, you kind of think, he's done all this work in the philosophy of religion, he's an ardent supporter of Reformed epistemology and Christian belief, he's a Christian, and it'd be kind of sort of weird to then see the way his theory of knowledge unfolds, because it does take on this externalist kind of, it's wrapped in this externalism. And I guess I just maybe naively was thinking that he would be a good old-fashioned internalist, right? With some sort of my evidence, my arguments, my reasons that are all internally accessible to my self-reflective awareness being the high watermark for what makes a belief rational or not. But he doesn't do that. So yeah, he claims that he's advocating a naturalistic epistemology, but it's embedded within a supernatural metaphysics, which creates a kind of weird tension to me to this day. What I was going to say though is that he jettisons the justification condition in favor of talking about warrant instead of justification, and they're different things. I mean, warrant's whatever you add to true belief to get knowledge. So that means that warrant has to also solve the Gettier problem. Whereas in these typical internalist accounts, you get justified true belief plus a fourth condition. And everybody to the debate agrees that the fourth condition is going to have to be some sort of external making condition, right? Part of what's gone wrong with the hapless victims in the Gettier cases is that their justifications, their reasons, their arguments for their beliefs have become disconnected, so to speak, from the fact in the world that makes it true, So whatever the fourth condition is, it's going to be external, and Plantica just kind of runs those two together. He just gets rid of the justification part and says, well, let's just call warrant whatever it takes to turn true belief into knowledge. That's a different project. It's in some ways much harder, I think. I don't know if that helps or not, to think about it that way a little bit. I feel like everybody's fallen asleep. Maybe myself included. Hope not. Let me show you. So what do people think about? I was reading the post, and I'm sorry for getting the discussion board up a little late. So no, it's not a problem if you didn't post for today. But try to maybe get something for next time, because we may, depending on, I know I'm pretty sure Alan will be here, but depending on how things play out, if there's more that we can cover, then I may let Alan do his thing and then fill in the remaining time. I just want to try to stay as close to schedule as I can. Let me show you. So what do people think? I mean, I was reading some of the posts, and it seems like they're kind of, again, there's some disagreement about the stuff on relativism. So it starts off, right? All I did was just basically compile all these different theses. I mean, he spends a lot of time just trying to find something controversial, right? I mean, but relativism is one of those things. It has a kind of allure, right? I mean, especially maybe not so much for you folks now, because you're graduating senior philosophy majors who've had a lot of philosophy courses here or elsewhere, and whether you agree with some versions of absolutism for real, or whether you just know that analytic philosophers tend to not like relativism and you joined for that reason, it's not a, it's something that's trendy, it's popular, right? People like to talk that way and say, oh, it's just all relative, depending what you know is a function of something other than just your reasons and whether it's true or not, right? It's determined by some other thing. So the first couple here, right, that what one person knows might differ from what another person knows. Well, yeah, I mean, there's nothing threatening about that, right? I mean, Dominic knows things I don't know, and I know things that Tyler doesn't know, and so on for Bettina, right? I mean, because we're all different people, and we've all had different experiences, and so that's not a very threatening thesis. What one person knows at one time might differ one thing at another time. Well, of course, I mean, because your evidence changes, right? And so at one point in time, you know something, like I know that I'm sitting, but not anymore. Standing. Right? So I mean, what I know at one time it changes over time. I mean, nothing too threatening there. What's generally known in one society might differ from what's generally known in another. Well, yeah, I mean, take the ancient Greeks, right? The flat earth, that's kind of a nice example. It's simple. If you compare ancient cultures with contemporary Western society, there's going to be differences for sure. I mean, we know a lot. We think we know a lot more now, right? They knew stuff. They were wrong about stuff, but so were we, right? It's just a question of historical perspective and sort of hindsight. But yeah, I mean, that can be different. What's generally known in one society at one time might differ from what's generally known in that society in another. So same thing, just analogous to R1 and R2, right? That societal knowledge, if you want to call it that, right, can evolve and change over time. Right? So this gets us to R5, and this starts to get a little bit more interesting maybe here. The correct or reasonable system of principles for forming beliefs for one person or group can be different from the correct or reasonable system for another. This is starting to sound more like something that would conflict maybe with an absolutist kind of perspective. So he talks about absolutism, right? And he does spell it out. I can't remember exactly where, but he says something to the effect that absolutism is the idea, according to which there's only one correct system applicable to all people. This is at the top of 179, right? So if you're an absolutist about these epistemological matters, like whether or not something counts as knowledge, an item counts as knowledge, then you think that there's a single kind of standard that determines whether or not something is an item of knowledge or not. If you don't believe that, you think the standards are relative. The standards change, depending on whatever you let be the fluctuating parameters. This is really appealing to a lot of folks, not so much philosophers, but in other areas of the academy.
So that basically means like maybe in some society they have a system that says like all it takes is a belief to have knowledge. That would work for them.
Well, that would be that'd be a different epistemic principle, right? Or epistemological rule or whatever. What really is going on there is it would be a different analysis of knowledge, right? So think back to our analysis. We're still working with JTB plus whatever it takes to get around Gettier. And if that's correct, then according to the sort of standard methodology, the traditional approach, then that's a necessary truth. And so anybody who doesn't satisfy those conditions doesn't know. And anybody who does know. But if you could have multiple different analyses of, say, our concept of knowledge, and it was the same concept, then like you can't, there are certain concepts that you can get. I've seen Professor Rosencrantz give examples like this before. I might not be able to think of it on the fly, but sometimes for certain like geometrical notions, geometrical concepts, you can analyze what it is to be a square in two different but seemingly equally good ways. whether you make use of notions like equiangular and equilateral, having 90-degree angles, all this kind of stuff, depending on what you build into the analysis. So I don't know that as a traditional epistemologist, I'm glad you guys are kind of helping me to think about this. I don't know that I feel threatened at the idea that there might be different, equally good analyses of our concept of knowledge, but it has to be the same concept that's getting analyzed. And unfortunately, because of the way the debate has started to go, this sort of rift between internalist and externalist about knowledge and about justification, sometimes you get the sense that we're talking past each other. At least it feels that way to me. Like they're sort of much more content with like the human being is a thermometer kind of thing, a sensitive registering device, and that, or these like I know Tyler's a fan of some of the information theoretic type accounts because they fit well, they comport well with work in other areas like artificial intelligence, their expert systems, neural networks, these kinds of things. And I think Fred Dretske's an externalist epistemologist who has defended this kind of information theoretic sort of approach for a long time, and others are keen on it too. So it's not always obvious to me that we're analyzing the same concept, but there do appear to be, at least in the case of some really basic, like I said, these geometrical things, cases where you can have two different putative analyses of the concept, and they both seem to work, they seem to be equally good, but they're different. Maybe interestingly different, maybe not. I mean, it's a concept of a square, so I'm real excited, but it's different. Knowledge is causation, knowledge, mind, morally right action, free will, right? God, omnipotence, whatever. These are a lot higher level concepts than some of these. That's why there are so few successful conceptual analyses, in part, because the interesting concepts are really thick concepts. So what do people think about R5? To reject it? Dominic's not happy with this. Let's see.
It's just saying, to me, if you say there's a correct reasonable system of principles for forming beliefs,
Yeah.
for one person, then it can be the same for another, or there can be a different one for another.
Yeah.
It's kind of saying like you have competing theories that both just analyze knowledge, they can both be right. Foundationalists can be right.
And the coherentist gets to be right too.
Yeah, it's just like that doesn't seem to be the case,
Well, we're just talking about beliefs. Beliefs can be wrong. The point is we're forming beliefs in different ways. Both of us could be wrong, but it's just...
Yeah, so I have a principle of belief formation because I'm an evidentialist that says do your best to, it says follow your total evidence, but as a policy of belief formation, it's something like always try my hardest to follow my total evidence, right? And then like Alan's got a principle of belief formation that says something that's different than that, whether it's incompatible with that. This is sort of two things, right? Is it different but compatible, or is it saying that there's, like, if you have some principle and it's an implication of your principle or entailment of your principle, that in cases where there's either no evidence one way or the other, or the evidence is counterbalanced, go ahead and flip a coin to decide how to believe. I mean, we're cooking up these principles willy-nilly. We can make them whatever we want, right? I mean, so some people they might like that policy, because, there'll be some bad argument for it, trust me, but they'll say something like, look, I mean, what's the harm in believing? I don't have any evidence either way, or the evidence is counterbalanced and an action is required, right? So if those are the two different principles, then they're in conflict. So I'm not really sure how somebody can think that like that situation could ever, this ultimately gets us down to the problem at the very end, right? Where in order to be in that kind of situation, it looks like you have to believe the other person is wrong, and or believe that you've got better reasons for your belief, right? Better methods or something. R6, you know, no standards or beliefs are really rational as distinct from merely locally accepted as such. When in Rome, do as the Romans. I guess, I mean, you know.
Seems even more objectionable than the fifth one.
Everybody here forms, you know, they go beyond their evidence. So their evidence suggests, you know, this is the extent of what they're entitled to believe, but they're a little bit more lax, a little more liberal. So they embrace a little bit more. What is the extent of that? Maybe some bad inductive inferences, or you know, they believe in some bad inference to the best explanation stories, or accept track record arguments when they don't have enough of a track record to underwrite them. Or, you know, something like wishful thinking, hasty generalizations. I mean, it seems like you could easily imagine a society, it wouldn't be a very fun one, I think, to be a part of, where people routinely engaged in fallacious reasoning, right? And formed beliefs on the basis of those kinds of inferences.
Is that not the case?
What? Well, yeah, well, we're in that
I mean,
world.
I think we are in that world.
Yeah.
I mean, in a very real sense, but maybe that's just me.
Yeah, well, you're
Seems like-
rightly, I think, a little skeptical.
I think, like what number 6 is saying is like, so how in Imperial Japan they believed the emperor was like descended from God,
Yeah.
whereas at the same time, you know, the Americans didn't believe that our president, you know, leader of our country was descended from, you know, God.
Yeah,
So
so,
it's saying like, well, if you were in Japan, you're okay with it's okay to believe that.
yeah.
But then if you're in America, it's not okay to believe that the leader of your country is from God. It seems to be.
And this goes right to the heart of a lot of the stuff that people get really excited about, right? I mean,
Yeah.
not excited in a good way either. Like
Yeah.
upset excited. Usually non-philosophers in my experience,
Yeah, exactly.
right? Well, I mean, in this, you know, whatever, that's a sociological kind of observation, but yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of us, it's kind of like, look, I mean, can't you just want to sort of shake somebody and say, can't you see that these can't both be? It's sort of, this happens with religious belief a lot, right? I know Dave in his post talked about that, and I appreciated it. Where, you know, folks want to say, well, look, you know, tolerance and trying to be respectful, right, of other people's points of view, and to embrace diversity, we need to respect one another's different religious perspectives. And that all sounds fine. I mean, I'm with Feldman in thinking that there aren't any implications for how we ought to behave or treat one another that you can get. There's no easy argument from thinking that tolerance and open-mindedness and things like that are good things to have in a free society, and when you're dealing with a lot of, you know, pluralistic values. But that's a different question from the question of can all of these different claims be right? I mean, it seems like part of the issue with, at least to stick with the example involving traditional religions, is that they often do contradict one another, or they conflict with one another. And so it's kind of like one of those deals where it's getting uncomfortable at the family dinner, and somebody says, well, look, you know, let's just agree to disagree. You're right about yours, and I'm right about mine. And it's like, well, it's unsatisfying, but maybe for some folks it's a way of trying to avoid a lot of cognitive dissonance, especially if it's family that you're, you know, I'm sure each of you has as well, at some point or another, had a lot of discussions about this kind of stuff with people. And, you know, it's often will kind of boil down to arguing, you know, the wrong way, not like philosophical argument, but an argument because somebody's upset that you've impugned their view, or just don't think that they could be right about, you know, or just even trying to suggest that they couldn't all be right, you know. So yeah, I mean, I'll stop with that for now, but depending on how things go next time, we may get to talk about some more of this. I kind of like to. We may have the time, but yeah.
I still have a question.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
you can have.
Well, it might take a minute, so I was actually gonna wait till after class
Mm.
too, but so it's up to you. But I mean, it's still relevant to our.
To this discussion,
like,
yeah. So Alan, did you have something too?
No, actually, I was just agreeing.
Okay. You're just, yeah, go ahead.
Yes,
Yeah,
that-
I didn't have anything to say.
Okay, so not to backtrack too much, but the discussion we were having before, when we were saying like it's not irrational for someone to like get the conjunction fallacy wrong. You
Yeah.
know, it's not fair to say that they're irrational, even though they're producing the wrong answer and they're not
Right.
wrong.
Yeah, they're clearly mistaken.
Okay, so I feel like R8 kind of like clarified it for me in a way, because it's like, I think I was saying that their belief was irrational, and not meaning to say that they, as a like they're not as a whole irrational. Like, would you agree that their belief is irrational? Like they're wrong. Like the belief that it's more probable for Lynn to be a bank teller and a feminist versus, you know, that's just a flat out mathematically wrong thing. So would that be a rational belief?
Yeah, well, let me give you another example then. It's sort of a parallel thing, and you tell me what you would think about this one. Suppose you had a kid who was raised in an environment and educated by people who routinely reinforced and taught the wrong rules of arithmetic. But they internalized those wrong rules really, really well. And they had no reason for thinking that they were just like we were all as kids, right? I mean, I didn't sit around for the most part as a little kid questioning my teachers. I mean, maybe a little bit, but you know, the teacher tells you to sit down, you sit down. The teacher tells you that this is the, you know, this is how it works arithmetically, then you do it. So I mean, in a situation like that, it's kind of like the ancients with the flat Earth, right? I mean, my conclusion was that they were rational in believing that the Earth was flat, where it looks like you're committed to saying that not only are they wrong, but they're irrational.
But it seems like that's supporting the relativistic view, because you're saying it's okay for one person to have belief in P, but the other person to have the same belief not P, and then not have any reason.
But I have a reason here, because the evidence is different. That's the reason, right? I mean, so this is the part that has to be built in, is that if two people have and this, we didn't get far enough in the discussion, but the idea has always been that, well, look, suppose me and Dominic are disagreeing about something. He believes, you know, P, and I believe not P. And, you know, say, well, you know, I've got my evidence and you've got your evidence, and so we could get along, because it's the difference in our evidence that makes for each of us being able to be rational. But then when we sit down and he says, well, what is your evidence? Show me your evidence, or tell me what make available to me. And I share all my evidence, and then I say the same thing to him, and he does that with me.
Mhm.
Well, now we've got this, we've both kind of got access to each other's evidence,
Yeah.
right? So on the assumption that there's a single body of evidence there, it can't justify belief in a contradiction.
Okay. I mean, it just seems like it's trying to make it more okay for the other person to be wrong in a way.
Oh,
I mean,
well-
you both end up less rational or less
I mean-
irrational in the end.
Yeah, I think we're still just back to our original kind of thing, which is that I think, and it may just be a difference in what we're interested in doing. Like,
Perhaps.
you know, I mean, I just don't equate rationality with truth. I equate rationality with justification. And
Okay.
truth is truth.
Okay, I'm thinking rationality for me is like epistemic rationality, like having a
Yeah, me
knowing
too.
what it is. So I mean, that's
Yeah, me too. But I mean, it's just, again, though, it's this defeasible fallibilistic line, right? Now there's all kinds of other things, right? There's behaving rationally. There's rational action, which is different than rational belief, you know. But it just seems to me like a kid who's been taught the wrong rules of arithmetic, he shouldn't have to bear the weight of being irrational because he's following his evidence.
it's not. I guess, but
He's wrong.
yeah.
You're mistaken.
I mean,
But then once he gets taught the new, like the actual
Yeah,
rules,
you
Sure.
teach him the new rules, and then he's got new evidence.
Yeah.
You say, oh, you know, you had this person taught you wrong,
And then if he continues to still apply the wrong rules of arithmetic,
Then
then
he's-
he's
I guess I
Then
see
he
what you're
runs
saying, but
afoul.
I guess it just kind of comes down to the point of like, at some point, it seems like you have to question his evidence. In the end, like,
Oh.
I guess that.
So you don't like the idea that evidence could be misleading or incomplete or somehow.
Well, no, I just don't. I guess it's like there's never an amount of evidence usually that's like, okay, that's enough. I
Outside
got
of,
it.
well, yeah, outside of logic and mathematics, it's hard to see that you're ever going to get conclusive evidence for much of anything, right?
Yeah.
Certainly not for any contingent empirical statements, but or maybe some statements about your own self-reflective
Mhm.
awareness or states of mind. Perhaps you could know them with certainty. But yeah, if the gripe is just that, well, look, we're trying to do some sort of cognitive science or AI program, or we're trying to build, whatever, we need to have these really, really high standards, but they're not going to be satisfiable for anything short of an omniscient being. And that's a problem. So I mean, but it doesn't bother me to have to have it as a consequence of the view of evidentialism that a person who's been misinformed but otherwise is doing everything fine, that they get assessed as rational, because none of us knows that our evidence, you know what I'm saying?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. And so if we have to make it like to this high standard stuff, we're not gonna get justified in believing much
Yeah.
anything, we're not gonna know anything.
And my solution isn't necessarily having a high standard, but it's more just thinking of it in like a gray scale.
Yeah. It's just like,
But
and so maybe your
yeah.
earlier point is just like, well, how much is enough?
Exactly.
It's contextually determined, it depends on, and some of Lewis's stuff, right, are the stakes high or whatever?
So it's like for the
Yeah.
kid knowing that his
Right.
parents are the only ones or whatever that taught him math would probably give him